Hello, everybody, in person and online, and welcome to this public program with Doug Brook, author of Rear Pew Mirror Volume 2, Wrath of the Columns. We're really excited to get to be a place to launch this second volume of this work of humor columns. We're still in the virtual space, so virtual friends, if you have questions, which I'm sure you do, you can pop them in the chat, and at the end, we will read them aloud, friends, and maybe if they're good. And then folks in person will pass around the mic. And now, see, it's a fast intro. I'm a fast intro person. I want to introduce Doug Brook. Doug Brook has been the back page humor columnist for Southern Jewish Life magazine since 1996 and premiered the related Rear Pew Mirror podcast in 2021. Beyond a career in senior management in Silicon Valley, this Alabama native is a theater actor, director, and playwright, as well as longtime synagogue instructor, short notice Torah chanter, and substitute sermonizer when lightning isn't in the forecast. He recently received a graduate degree from the Jewish Theological Seminary, clearly indicating they haven't yet read his column. He doesn't like noodle kugel. Welcome, Doug Brook.
Thank you very much. And hello, everybody, and hello, everybody. So, as she says, we are here because of the launch of Rear Pew Mirror II, the Wrath of Columns. And this is the second year where I have launched a collection of the columns I've been writing for Southern Jewish Life ever since 1996. Which I just realized right now for the first time is a tremendous irony, given that the Wrath of Columns is, of course, based on the Wrath of Khan, and their ship launched in 1996. I'm going to have to ponder the significance there, actually, later on. And so what it is a collection of 30-ish, I think this one has 32 in it, columns from over the years, spanning good 25 years or so, collected into several groups of themes. And in this volume, the themes are the final frontier, ironically enough, because of the Star Trek titling, symbology, rabbinic sources, the chosen game, so a section about sports, mostly baseball, and governmentality, given that this was an election year. So what I figured to do is to present you with excerpts from this and a little bit of context, and also answer any questions that might come up. But the first thing I want to do is just say it's been a long month, a hard month in various ways for people, various different ways for different people. And it's been a hard year. It's been a hard decade. It's a hard century far in lots of ways. The theme is it's okay to laugh. It is all right to laugh. And I'm going to cite some early sources that corroborate that fact, because laughter is a birthright in the Jewish community, has been for a long time. You go back to ancient times, the middle of the 20th century, when you had the Catskills and you had Jackie Mason and you had George Burr. Well, they weren't all in the Catskills, but you get the idea. You have so many Jewish comedians. And it goes a lot further back than that, though. It goes all the way back to the Talmud, in fact. And here are a couple of examples. And yes, these are actual quotes from a tractate of the Talmud, not the one I made up in volume 1, but one called Yevamot. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said to him, "Judging by his question, it seems to me that this sage has no brain in his head." It's a Talmudic quote. Later on in Yevamot, we get a little father and son dialogue. Rav Yehuda was teaching Torah to Rav Yitzchak, his son, and they encountered the verse from Ecclesiastes, "And I find more bitter than death the woman." His son said to him, "For example, whom?" His father replied, "For example, your mother." This is actually in the Talmud. But it goes back even further than that. If you go back all the way to Exodus, after the whole thing with the Mount Sinai and smashing the tablets, Aaron says, "I told them, whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off. Then they gave me the gold. I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." So there have been punchlines for a very, very long time. And actually, let me ask a question. Do we know when is the first time there was ever laughter in the Torah? When was the very, very first time? What's the first time? Sarah. Almost. Very, very close. You're about 7 verses off. But yes, that is the best known one. Sarah, of course, when she's been told, okay, yeah, you're 90 years old. You're finally about to have a child. Okay. And this ends up being Isaac, in Hebrew Yitzchak. The name comes from tzachak, which means I laughed. So yes, she laughed when she was told, yeah, 90 years old. Oh, yeah, sure. A few verses earlier, though, Abraham was told the same thing. And he was 100 years old. And it says in there, not just that he laughed, it says, Vayiplu al panav, and he fell on his face and then laughed. So not only is that the very first time we have laughter in the Bible, but also the very first pratfall that was followed by a laugh in the entirety of the Bible. So this goes way back to near the beginning, and that was actually just in the Torah reading 2 Saturdays ago. So here's one other anecdote, and this comes from Sifrei Devarim, just to give a little bit more context about why it's okay to laugh. Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yehoshua, and Rabbi Akiva were entering Rome and heard the multitudes from some Roman named place, Puteoli. I should have looked up how to pronounce that. I never did. Some Roman place. The sages began weeping, and Rabbi Akiva was laughing. They said to him, "Why are we crying and you're laughing?" Rabbi Akiva replied to them, "And you, why are you weeping?" They said, "Shouldn't we cry? These Gentiles who sacrifice to idols and bow to false gods, they dwell securely and in tranquility. And our Lord's house was consumed by fire and is inhabited by wild beasts." Rabbi Akiva replied, "That's why I'm laughing. If this is what he gave to those who anger him, how much more so to the doers of his will?" So there's a lot of making lemonade out of lemons through the course of Jewish history. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be able to laugh. And that was the goal of me writing this column, putting together the collection, just to give a little bit of background. So yes, I'm from Alabama. I grew up in Birmingham. I somehow accidentally ended up in California for going on 29 years, like my watch can tell me what year it is. But basically, my endeavors have revolved around 3 things. 1, I work in high tech and technical writing, technical communication. 2, I work in theater, as she said, as an actor, director, playwright. 3, I teach. And a recent seminary degree was, I'd been teaching for about 25 years, and I figured it's about time I go and find out what I should have known all along. And, what else I should be doing, and if anything was actually something I was doing right. All 3 of those are about audience. Whether technical writing, it's about telling people how to get from point A to point B without blowing something up. Success. Theater, of course, a completely subjective realm, completely different. Teaching, again, an audience. You're trying to get people to broaden in some way. And so each of these are different media for the same purpose, trying to do something for an audience. And beyond that, I'd say that in teaching, I never teach faith, I never teach belief. I give people information, I give people skills so that they can find whatever they're going to find on their own. Theater, kind of the same thing. I'm not one of the people who's involved with theater for the sake of telling people a message and telling people what to think. I just want to do theater so that people will think about something. And if they just want to be entertained, they can be entertained. If they want something deeper, peel a layer, same show. It's there for you. That was the purpose behind this column. I wanted to be able to give something back since I was moving all the way out into the Wild West. And writing this column was an attempt to do that in a way like a gateway drug. It's like approach this stuff lightly. So much in Judaism is so serious and should be. something lighter, but something that's not necessarily the same stereotypical Jewish jokes of all time. Something maybe a level more in depth, maybe a level less commonly accessible, which is one of the reasons why this book has a 15-page glossary in it, which might actually be funnier than the rest of the book. But, giving people enough of an entertainment to be able to get curious and maybe want to know more. So that was really the goal of doing all of this in the first place. And then it went downhill from there. So basically what I decided to do during the lockdown was to start a podcast of it, as well as half of the planet was doing while everybody was, staying home for a while. As well as start putting together these collections. And so last year, the first collection came out, this year, the second one. Next year, there should be another one, God willing. And originally, I was going to continue on with the Star Trek title themes. And next year, in honor of the search for Spock, the third book was going to be the search for Schach, since it'll be coming out right around Sukkot anyway. But I think we're going to shift course and actually use Torah naming. So right now we're looking at Rear Pew Mirror III being Laphiticus, in honor of how hilarious Leviticus is. Book 4 is looking to be Rear Pew Mirror 4, Num and Numbers. And then book 5 is looking to be Deuteronomy. So we're probably going to end up going on that course, but we shall see. One of the other things I wanted to do is the front covers of the books have been actual sanctuaries where I have been keenly involved over time. Like this one is the view of the back row of the sanctuary where I grew up at Temple Bethel in Birmingham. And actually, the one from volume 1 happened to have been from the back row of the temple where I currently teach out in California, actually, where I actually do sit in the back row. And one other thing I should say about that is Rear Pew Mirror is because when I was in Pittsburgh in college originally, I was at different temples over different years. The most famous being I actually was at Tree of Life for a semester where bad things happened a few years ago, which still boggles my mind. But one of the rabbis I worked with there, he said he would always explain to people why nobody sits in the front row, as the front row is reserved for the righteous and the pure of heart. So beginning with that, I always started sitting in the back, and I still do to this day. And so Rear Pew Mirror is just reflections from the back row of the sanctuary. So with that, I thought to share some of these reflections with you. And the first one is, so what I read you is those excerpts from the Talmud and such are actually the intro to the rabbinic sources section, which contains various discoveries of mine over the years, such as the original teachings of Gerb the caveman rabbi. But we're going to focus in on a different one because ostensibly I have a recurring thing, it's probably come up like 6 times, I suppose, where we have what's like a lot of Jewish magazines and newspapers, they'll have an Ask the Rabbi feature. This is because there was a typo in the original contract, an Ask the Rabbit feature. All right. And so this comes from actually back in 2011, which was a year of the rabbit. Though, of course, as hopefully a lot of these things are, it's somewhat timeless, and I'm not even sure when the next year of the rabbit is, but stay tuned for that from this. So this is what we called the year of the rabbi. Let us begin. As in let us, because a rabbi. Okay. Yeah. Now that we've just finished celebrating the start of the year of the rabbi, you mean the Chinese year of the rabbit? No, I mean its Jewish progenitor, the year of the rabbi. What does something Chinese have to do with Judaism? Where did you have dinner last December 24th? Chinese food is not Jewish food. How often do you hear people talking about going to the Jewish deli on Erev Christmas? Regardless, I'm here to talk about the long-forgotten Jewish origins of the Chinese years. Why? This is Ask the Rabbit. I didn't ask about that. You were supposed to. Learn your lines. Specifically, I'm here to talk about the ancient Jewish roots of the Shengzhou, also known as the Chinese zodiac. What makes the Shengzhou sound Jewish? It's no more pronounceable to most of you than Hebrew. Are you saying the Jews have our own zodiac? Lots of Jews own zodiacs. Those little boats are killer. Why should we believe the year of the rabbit was really originally the year of the rabbi? In the Chinese zodiac, the rabbit symbolizes creativity, compassion, sensitivity, friendliness, outgoingness, belief in community and family, and conflict avoidance. Rabbits approach confrontation calmly and with consideration. If that doesn't sound like your rabbi, form a search committee. Isn't this just a cheap way to get yourself a double honor this year? Next question. Do Jews really need a second additional New Year? Judaism has 4 other New Years already. The first of Nisan, just before Passover, is the ecclesiastical or religious biblical New Year, because that's the one that's mentioned in the Torah. Rosh Hashanah is the civil New Year, despite the lack of civility surrounding people saving seats at services. Tu B'Shvat, within a couple of weeks of the Chinese New Year, is the New Year for trees. And 1 month before Rosh Hashanah is the New Year for animals. We have a New Year for animals? Why do we need this year of the animal thing? We already have matzah for 7 days. Why do we need an 8th? We already have 6 fast days. Why do we need a 7th? We can have another New Year. Fine. So what are the true Jewish origins of the other animals in the Chinese zodiac? These are the animals of the Chinese zodiac and the origin of each in Jewish history in order of appearance. The dragon. Jews don't believe in dragons. But we do believe that sermons can drag on. So bring a pillow to services in 2012. The snake. It was a year of the snake when Eve was tempted with the apple in the Garden of Eden. Horse. Moses' speech impediment is well known. This was the year in which he repeatedly pleaded with Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, so much so that he went hoarse. Okay, and I'm going to stop there for just a second, because in Fiddler on the Roof, one of the things that we keep arguing about in tradition is, of course, it was a horse, it was a mule, it was a horse, it was a mule. So personally, I've decided it's a horse mule. It's a mule with a sore throat. All right. The year of the goat or sheep. The Exodus from Egypt features the Paschal lamb, Chad Gadya, and the commandment to not cook a kid in its mother's milk. There have since been many other historical events where Jews were made the scapegoats. Monkey. Still bitter about the kid in mother's milk thing, prohibiting chicken parmesan? This year often sees Jews monkeying around with interpretations to adjust Jewish life to the times. Year of the rooster. The year of monkeying around is followed by a year of crowing even louder than usual against the establishment, often resulting in overhauls of synagogue boards and staff. The year of the dog. Tired from crowing, the people return to faith. As a result, this actually honors someone else, but the spelling is reversed because Hebrew goes right to left. The year of the pig. After a whole year returned to faith, more Jews stray this year than any other. But I won't bore you with the details. We've hogged enough time on this already. Let's see what else is bacon. I know. The year of the rat. This year, the straying Jews are ratted out to the clergy. Also, there have been many events where Jews were made out to be rats. The year of the ox. Originally, this was the year of the lox. After being made out as rats, Jews would recount their latest survival and celebrate by eating. And the year of the tiger. The Tigris, of course, is one of the 4 rivers that bordered the Garden of Eden. So the Tigris became a symbol of a return to paradise. But there have been 1 or 2 instances in history where religions have been what some might call sexist. Changing this year to the tiger is one such instance. And last and certainly, what is the appropriate drink to celebrate the year of the rabbi? Beer. One with less barley and more hops. So, that is the wisdom of the rabbit. Now, it is possible that there might have been some accidental wordplay in there. So, depending on your tolerance level for that, there is an excerpt in here that I thought about reading that's in the actual governmentality section, which is a little bit closer to the line, content-wise, but I think I'm going to do. So, but first, let me introduce you to the section of governmentality with a few quotes from some significant Jewish figures in the history of government going back thousands of years. First, were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. This was, of course, said by Thomas Jefferson. If voting made any difference, they wouldn't let us do it. That was said by the American Shalom Aleichem, who is also known as Samuel Clemens, who's also known as Mark Twain. And the reason that he is called the American Shalom Aleichem, actually, is because sometime when one of them was being interviewed about the other, people had referred to Shalom Aleichem as a Jewish Mark Twain. And so when Mark Twain heard this, he was like, no, Shalom, I'm the American Shalom Aleichem. So there was a lot of contemporaneous respect there, which was very cool. Next, those who are too smart to engage in politics are punished by being governed by those who are dumber. That comes from Plato Badia. Suppose you were an idiot, and suppose you were a member of Congress. But I repeat myself, again, the American Shalom Aleichem. Some men change their party for the sake of their principles, others their principles for the sake of their party. This comes from Sir Winston Templehill. Things are more like they are now than they ever were before. That's from Dwight D. Eisenstein. The future will be better tomorrow. That is from Daniel, not the book, but Daniel Quayle. We hung the petty thieves in a point. Sorry. I think I made it 15 minutes without caving. We hang the petty thieves and appoint the great ones to public office. That was written by Aesopperstein. Tell the truth and you won't have so much to remember. That's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. And I don't make jokes. I just watch the government and report the facts. That is from Will Rogersberg. Now, this is actually based on a true story. This is also, by complete coincidence, from 2011. This is under the title of Legislating Cutbacks. San Francisco has long been a key battleground for progressive social change. The most recent example is the Giants beating all odds by winning the 2010 World Series just to make it cool to wear orange. But like a prom date who had too much of the spiked punch, one man has gone too far. Matthew Hess got a proposition on the November ballot in San Francisco to ban all circumcision within city limits for any guy age 18 except in medical emergencies. Hess is the head of the sponsoring group, which is based in San Diego, where San Francisco politics matter greatly because it's just a short 9-hour drive away. He tried a similar effort closer to home in Santa Monica, but his supporters pulled out very early, almost immediately after getting their campaign up. This is why I was a little hesitant about reading this one. We're getting into the PG-13 realm, but it'll stay there. If anybody at home has their kids watching, this is a good time to send them to the kitchen for a glass of milk. Where was I? Nonetheless, Hess rallied hard to get enough local impressionable anti-oppositionist signatures to qualify for the election. While Hess and his intactivists, that's actually what they called themselves, claim it's a question of medical concern, barbarism, and gender equality, it's obviously largely impacting Jews and Muslims who have more skin in this game than anyone. Hess believes there's a double standard in the female circumcision, better known and better described as mutilation, is illegal, but that male circumcision, better known and better described as not mutilation, is condoned. He thinks it's an important issue of gender equality that must finally come to the fore. Hess has produced 3, so help me God, I'm not making this up, Foreskin Man comic books to flesh out his case. The ADL has condemned this series, which features the villain Monster Moyle. In his latest installment, the ADL's concerns, thinking they're just being snippy. But no matter how you slice it, this has become a significant social debate, and it's growing. A legal battle is underway to remove it from the ballot because California statutes bar local laws restricting medical professionals from carrying out medical procedures. Discussions among Jewish and other community leaders are underway to determine if the judicial approach fails, what else to do to tip the scales. And I think I'm going to leave that at that one. Yeah. Okay. So there are a lot of things you can talk. Why am I putting my glasses on? I just stopped reading. There are a lot of things that you can talk about when it comes to government, elections, things like that. Most of them we're not going to talk about right now, too soon. But there is one thing that comes up often, which is the Electoral College. And how does it work? So what I have here is its origin, the Electoral College. This is an excerpt from the book of Numbers that is not commonly included in most Bibles, which is to say any Bibles, but you can read it right here. This is Numbers chapter 9a. And a little intro to context before I actually read it to you. The book of Numbers, the fourth book of the Torah, begins with a census of the Israelites. Just the adult men, because biblical times. Many questions loomed about when they'd someday reach the promised land, not the least of which was, without Moses, who would lead future generations? How would they be selected? Just as there's often more to read between the lines, in this instance, there's more to read between the chapters. So, Numbers chapter 9a, verse 1. And the children of Israel had designated leaders, one leader for each of the 12 tribes, and to each of the 12 tribes there was one leader. Verse 2. And they were princes of their tribes, leading over the hundreds and the thousands, over the scores and the dozens, and over the stray tribesmen who wandered off, and they served under Moses. Chapter 3, or verse 3. And the children of Israel realized that they never had a say in who their top leader would be. Verse 4. Children of Israel said to Moses, we realized that we never had a say in who our top leader would be. If you've ever read Numbers, believe me, it's just like that. Verse 5. And Moses couldn't understand them because it's so hard to distinguish words when 603,550 adult men speak at once. Verse 6. So the Israelites conveyed their message instead through their tribal princes, and Moses heard them, but was unamused. Verse 7. And Moses refrained from bringing the Israelites' concern to the Almighty Big G, and then the Almighty Big G appeared to Moses and said, I understand the message for me. Verse 8. And Moses said, I was just stopping for a drink before speaking to you, but since you asked, the Israelites realized that they have no say in who their top leader would be. And the Almighty G said, Moses, remind the children of Israel that I am their top leader, who brought them out of their slavery in Egypt and who can put them right back. Verse 10. And Moses didst relay this response, and the children of Israel clarified that they were talking about Moses and apologized for the confusion. Verse 11. And the Almighty Big G declared, on the first Tuesday of the second month of the second year since the Exodus, there shall be an election. Verse 12. And so the handling of the election was placed in the hands of Elek ben Papla, who would handle the handling of the vote based on the recent census of Israelite men, ages 20 and older. And so Gamliel, son of Pedatsur of the tribe of Manasseh, and Abidan, son of Gidoni of the tribe of Benjamin, petitioned Elek, son of Papula, saying, our tribes have barely 30,000 men each, while some have over 100,000. Will never be a factor in the vote. And so Ben Papula declared, there will be two methods to count the vote. The actual number of votes indicating the overall tally across the nation, and a smaller vote by representatives of each tribe apportioned to give smaller tribes influence more equitable with the larger tribes. Verse 15. This system of election law was known as the electoral vote until this day. Verse 16, and Miriam said, the census included only men aged 20 years and older, but no women. Verse 17, and Elek ben Papula said, women won't get the right to vote until the year 1919. Verse 18, and Miriam replied, according to the Hebrew calendar, that was about 300 years ago. And Elek ben Papula relented. Verse 20, and so an election occurred, and Moses won the position of human leader of the children of Israel, which he didst already hold anyway. Verse 21, and there were allegations of the election being tainted by Prussian interference, but they were ignored because Moses ran unopposed. Verse 22, And Moses was sworn in, taking an oath with his hand on a draft of the Bible. Verse 23, and Moses vowed to lead the Israelites to the promised land, and he didst doeth this thusly. Verse 24, and Moses turned to the almighty big G to ask a question. Verse 25, and because the almighty big G is everywhere, Moses repeatedly spun around in circles, which helps explain why the Israelites would take another 38 years to traverse just one desert and 2 books of the Torah. Verse 26, and Moses said to the almighty big G, you are all powerful and all knowing. Can you tell us if this system will work for future generations? Verse 27, and the almighty big G didst grin and said, I am all knowing, so I know enough to stay out of it. So, one thing I will say also is that my column has always referred to God as the almighty big G for 2 reasons. One is the whole thing about writing God and G-D, which I never really cared for. But the other reason is because in the movie Oh God with George Burns, John Denver in the late 70s, at one point, George Burns refers to him as the big G. And I was like, yeah, cool. So always use that. Now, one other thing I'll say is, actually, I should apologize for the long hair and the beard because I'm in a production of Fiddler on the Roof, my second in 5 months, actually. And 6 days from now, this will all be gone. But for now, it's... Interestingly enough, with Fiddler on the Roof, there's a lot going on. There's a whole lot going on in there that you can parse and all of that. As I had mentioned to some folks earlier, I just did a graphic today, in fact, of a production photo that had me in it. I'm playing Laser Wolf this time. I played Tevye over the summer elsewhere. And so I introduced a starscape in the background and said to people online that they have one more weekend to be able to come and see my performance as the Jewish space laser. So, you know, that kind of a thing. And I already told you about our fight about the horse mule, you know, and all that. One of the things I also do as Laser Wolf is there's a couple of the women who are stage chatting with me in the middle of tradition when, you know, people are being introduced or whatever, and they're always asking me what the special is. And so every performance, we have something new. And so, for example, on Sunday at that matinee, the special of the week was Bratwurst. And I explained, you remember that kid running around the village who was the worst brat in the whole community? You won't be seeing him anymore. And there was one where I said that the special was secondary rib because it's not exactly like prime rib. It's smaller. There's no meat on the bone. It's just bone, but it's a little more expensive. You know, things like that. And there was actually also last weekend one performance where the special was rump roast. And I said, really, this is just a normal sirloin, but I've actually been sitting on it over and over all week to tenderize it. So it is now a rump roast. So, you know. It's the little things in life. But what I wanted to read for you real quick is actually something that's not in the book. It's too new for the book, but it's related to Fiddler on the Roof. There is an obscure song in there early in the show. Most musicals have what is called an I want song. All right. It's a song that is sung by the protagonist, usually like the second or third song in the show. And it's about what they want and what basically the rest of the show is about them trying to get. And a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. The I Want song is Pseudolus singing free because he wants to be free. Sound of Music, kind of similar actually, because she's singing the Sound of Music because she wants the freedom to have music expressing in her life. And she can't because she's in the I was going to say monastery, and that's not right. Convent. Thank you. The convent. Yes. I directed the show 12 years ago. I should know these things. So there's always an I Want song. And so in Fiddler on the Roof, it's a relatively obscure song called If I Were a Rich Man. All right. And so I have joked to our Tevye every now and then, what if right before you go on stage for that scene, I, as Laser Wolf, hand you a bag filled with like 500 kopecks? And all of a sudden, you're rich. You're not poor anymore. So now what's your song going to be about, huh? Well, this imagines that Tevye has become rich. And what are the consequences of that? Now, I will give an aside. If you go to the original Shalom Aleichem stories, The Fiddler on the Roof is based on, and I could go on for 6 hours about Fiddler on the Roof, its history and blah, blah, blah. But there is actually an early story in there where Tevye does make a fortune and immediately loses it. So this is not that. This is Tevye has made his money and he has built his house and various things that are alluded to in If I Were a Rich Man. This is a letter to him from the Anatevka Homeowners Association. Dear Tevye, we hope this letter finds you well. Everyone in the AHA is gratified to see that you have, in fact, become a rich man. After being blessed with 5 daughters and a life of poverty, it's a gift for you that the Almighty has seen fit to smite you with money, the world's curse. May you never recover. In the best interest of our little circle in this village, it's our humble duty to raise with you several issues that your small fortune has brought about. We ask that you attend to these matters with all due expedience. It was a delight to see you buy that big, tall house with rooms by the dozen. Not only is it right in the middle of the town, but that tin roof is as fine as those real wooden floors below. Regarding the house's interior, however, there's no concern about the one long staircase just going up, but the one even longer coming down does not comply with local building code. The one more leading nowhere just for show is similarly non-compliant. Stepping outside of the house, your good fortune has let you fill your yard with chicks and turkeys and geese and ducks, which the town both sees and unfortunately hears. While their noisy squawking is a reminder that there lives a wealthy man, each loud quack and lands like a trumpet on the ear, which has led to numerous complaints from your neighbors. Please find a way to limit their volume to a level comparable to that of your new milk cow. Speaking of noise, there have been numerous reports that your wife Golda, while supervising meals to her heart's delight, has also been screaming at your new servants day and night. It's not our place to intercede in matters of domestic service, but we wanted to caution you about this before a labor complaint could be filed. Regarding your neighbors, some have observed that you are regularly receiving the most important men in town, fawning on you and asking your advice. This is well and good, but if you please, Reb Tevye, we caution you to not overstep the limits of your knowledge. People might assume that because you're rich, you really know. But it actually does make a difference if you answer right along. For example, the good book makes no mention anywhere of a chicken. Perhaps the accuracy of your knowledge will improve now that you have the time you once lacked to sit in the synagogue and pray in your newfound seat by the eastern wall. Given that you now discuss the holy books with the learned men 7 hours every day, these domestic matters could easily escape your notice. That's why we're sending you this letter. We hope that you understand the various concerns raised in this letter and that you'll see fit to address them with all due speed. As you're doubtlessly discovering, while it is understandably desirable to become a wealthy man if one lives in poverty, with great wealth comes the great expense that wealth brings. The grass is sometimes greener on the other side of the shtetl. One last additional matter which came to our attention after most of this letter was written. Out of concerns related to both noise and safety, we must ask you to remove the musician who's reportedly on your playing a violin. In the first place, he's playing music that the performance of which is protected by copyright. On the other hand, and perhaps more importantly, he's at risk of falling and suffering a major injury. Really, Tevye, a fiddler on a hot tin roof? Sounds crazy, no? We hope that you take this in the spirit of community with which it's intended. It's not meant to spoil any vast eternal plan now that you're a wealthy man. And that is just the merest taste of the show behind the show that goes on in, dare I say, Fiddler on the Roof and probably every show in the history of live theater. So, with that, I had one other thing I was potentially going to read for you, but I also figure we are at a time where we can probably go straight to questions. Yes, sir.
No, you need to. Okay, there you go.
So Doug,
Yes,
you're a funny fella. And you grew up in Birmingham, Alabama,
I did.
Jewish.
Yes, indeed.
Do you, here at this museum, it's all about being Jewish in the South.
Mhm.
Do you find that your upbringing in any way has influenced or informed your humor in any way?
I think so, yes. And it's a funny thing because I just have this very different approach than I found a lot of the folks where I'm at have. And it goes way beyond the fact that when I'm teaching, I'll say things like Yom Kippur instead of Yom Kippur or something like that, you know, or the fact that I say orange instead of orange. But basically, I think that there is a certain laid back observationalism in it, which feels like it's probably better rooted being from the South, which I had myself experienced, and I've heard people say it's a little bit more laid back than, you know, the fast-paced frenetic, certainly where I am in Silicon Valley in California, or say New York or whatever, that we tend to not necessarily say an entire paragraph before we start thinking the beginning of a thought, you know, that kind of a thing. That is a little bit more of a sit back, wait for it, reflect, then observe kind of a thing. And I attribute that to it. But I mean, honestly, also, I think there are some particular events that have just fed it, just in terms of the kinds of things I try to include in it. Like growing up, very often we would have church groups come and be at services on given Friday nights. And many of these folks had literally never met somebody Jewish before and all that. And they were there to find out, you know, X or Y. And they would sit through the service, about 45 minutes. And then afterwards, after getting a little nosh, they would sit in a couple rows in the sanctuary and the rabbi would, you know, answer questions basically from the sublime to the ridiculous. And occasionally I'd be one of these little kids, and my brother sometimes too, I think, would be would be a kid just sitting in there, just listening in. And occasionally he'd be like, oh, why don't you answer this one? You know, the precocious little 8-year-old answers the question, all that. But just hearing the kinds of things and really having that perspective, as dare I say, a lot of Jewish comedy traditionally comes out of Jewish epicenters like New York, you know, being in a place where there's not this huge built-in audience or culture that understands all of it, you know, I think it feeds my perspective a bit. Which actually contradicts in a weird way the fact that I don't go a little bit deeper into certain bits, but by the same token, once you know those bits, or once I explain those bits, trying to not explain the joke, it opens the door, you know? So it's not necessarily trying to do it to an audience that already knows everything, I guess is the moral of the story.
Beginning. You mentioned a glossary that's 15 pages long.
Yes.
I am curious what types of things are in your glossary, and if you could share some with us. Most glossaries aren't 15 pages, and
absolutely. So the glossary basically is either terms that I figured people wouldn't generally know, or certain terms that were identified by someone who has been graciously going through both of these volumes, actually, and in this go round, identifying things that she would have otherwise Googled, and putting in definitions for those. And not all of them are necessarily Jewish terms as well, because again, there are some obscurities in here, like certain Star Trek things or certain Southern things, you know. So I think somewhere in here there might be a definition of Vulcan, for example, although there's a whole column about Vulcan, the statue and the planet from Star Trek, and, you know, all that. So yeah. But let's see. So just a couple of examples. Let's see. Hechsher. A designation for something, usually food, that is rabbinically certified. Typically, this refers to a mark on food products to indicate that they're kosher. Various rabbinic authorities have different food hechshers, such as OU, K, Circle K, 7-Eleven, and MOUSE. Let's do one more. The bottom of this page. Oh, yeah, same theme. Koshering. The process of making something kosher. Typically, this refers to the process of making a kitchen a place where kosher food can be prepared, a process that can include blowtorches, boiling water, and other children's toys. So yeah, that's a bit of a flavor of it. Or let's see, maybe one more. Yeah, let's see if this one works. Rabbi Akiva, who actually was mentioned in one of the things I read. A 2nd century rabbi who was a leading scholar and major contributor of teachings to the Talmud. Unfortunately for him, he wasn't paid by the word for his contributions, and he has no descendants collecting royalties from today's 73-volume set. So, a taste. Yes, sir. Go.
Give me 1 second.
Microphone's on its way.
Over to you. Otherwise, our friends on Zoom can't hear.
By the way, I was just curious, have you ever sung choruses? Because your voice is very good.
Actually, yeah, I have a few times, but yeah, I do a fair amount of musical theater. So yeah.
And are you tenor, bass, or baritone?
Bass.
Yeah, because I sing in church choirs myself.
Oh, very cool. Very nice. You're baritone, bass?
Baritone, and then a little bit more bass, sometimes barely tenor, but more bass.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah.
Yes, and in fact, I'm Catholic, but we have interfaith Thanksgiving services here a lot, and I've had the opportunity to help out in some of the different choirs, for the interfaith services, and it's very awesome too.
Very nice.
That's
excellent.
Thank you.
I have one final question before we sign off for tonight.
Yes.
And it's a question I've already asked you. And as I sat down, I lost it. It was about the number of volumes you're writing and going to review the stories you've told in the past. How do you decide this goes in volume 2 versus number 5, our Deuteronomy volume?
That is a good question that I haven't fully figured out yet, honestly. No, it's interesting because honestly, when I did volume 1 and then I pulled it together, and it has subject matter like food mashups, I think is one of the things I did, or mashups in general. Yeah, holiday mashups and services and Jewish culture in general and biblical sources. Yeah, and just a section on food. It was really like, okay, what are the ones, I just did a thing of what are the first like 20 or 30 columns that I can actually remember that I wrote, first of all, and that, tend to come up as like, okay, that's all right, and I pulled them together and I found themes and I clumped them together. And then for the second volume, I was like, okay, well, what are the ones that aren't part of that? And I started actually, scientific, and I'm going to put together a spreadsheet of all the rest and categorize and all that, because one of the things I'm already into is, okay, that one in the first volume would have been better in that group in the second, so there's a little bit of that. So I'm going to play with that a little bit more. And yes, there will be thematic stuff that I will plan out a few ahead, because I figured to do a few of these, every year for a while, because there's 28 years worth of material. And some of them I'm probably never going to touch because I'm like, but some of them take a little bit of rewrite. They all get rewritten a little bit. Some of them get rewritten a lot relative to their original form. But they'll probably cater a little bit to their titles. For example, one of the reasons for the Wrath of Columns title on this is because there is one column very early on that I did get a letter to the editor written about. And I responded to that by taking up the challenge that was offered in there of, well, how would you feel if somebody was mocking a Jewish symbol? And then I wrote a Mezuzah column. So in a little bit of a way, this comes from the whole thing with Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and that wonderful Shatner moment of Khan. And so by virtue of there being the one thing that ever got a complaint letter in here, it's Khan. So there's a little bit of a theme tie-in there, but they'll probably be more overt in the future.
Doug, I just wanted to ask you to comment on this. I'm thinking that this book or these books would make great Hanukkah presents. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, they would. Oh, absolutely. Somebody I know actually got like 10 copies of them last year. I'm not even making this one up. Got like 10 copies of them last year and gave them to all of her friends. And you know, it is just in time. 2 weeks ago when I was at one of my students' bar mitzvahs, they always do a, you know, who has good news from the week, blah, 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 kind of a thing. And so I said something about how my latest book was just published just in time for Rosh Chodesh shopping for going into the month of November. So, you know, by coincidence, Hanukkah is coming up soon as well. And so is secular Hanukkah as well, also beginning on the evening of the 24th this year, I believe. Yeah, makes a great gift.
And with that, I'm going to say thank you so much, Doug,
Thank you.
for sharing the Wrath of Columns with us. Wrath of the Columns. Wrath of Columns. You can tell that I'm not a Star Trek watcher, but I think I have some homework to do. And you can buy a copy of Rear Pew Mirror, Wrath of Columns.
You're good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wrote it wrong. That's my problem. For our online store, and also, where can folks find more about you?
You can go to rearpewmirror.com, or that links right over to my main site, brookwright.com, where it also has other stuff that I do with theater and with tech writing, though that's good for insomnia. And even actually on the serious side of life, I'm translating some rabbinic works from the 1700s, weirdly enough. So there's little bits on there from that too. But those are the best ways. Otherwise, Rear Pew Mirror is also on social media like Facebook and the Bird platform.
Perfect. And a recording of this will be available, and everybody who registered will also receive those in link form on that email. Keep up to date with MSJE on social media as well to find out what else is happening at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. And I thank everybody for joining us today, both in person and online. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.